the nickname Daisy for his night shift. She mentions that she'll deduct the cost of his meal from his first salary, and she introduces him to her son Henry, who calls him a freeloader, but she hits him for being rude. She tells him to show Merlin the guest room, and on their way, Merlin tries to bribe him so that he won't tell her about their first encounter. He offers to teach Henry his blade strike so that he can fight holy tier opponents, but he doesn't trust Merlin. He notes that only a talented person like the Nightblade can defeat a holy tier opponent, so Merlin tells him he's the Nightblade, but Henry refuses to believe him. Meanwhile, the adventurers struggle to defeat the goblins because they weren't expecting to fight an entire army of them. They realize they have no other option, so they try to escape, but they get captured by the goblin chancellor named Gia. Merlin starts working at the inn, and he focuses entirely on the female customers to win their hearts, but the male customers are insecure because of him. Martha is pleased with his performance because he increased their sales, and she believes he must have excelled in his previous jobs as well. She thinks his nickname Daisy might look odd in the newspaper, but he fears it will lead to more embarrassment, so he tells her they don't need ads. Henry interrupts them, saying he's just a freeloader who feeds off women's money, and tells him to stay away from his mother. Alice can't find her target, but she suddenly hears Henry hitting the tree, and realizes he's angry at a handsome freeloader, so she shows him the poster. He notes that it doesn't look like the freeloader he knows, who has been conning women at their tavern to increase their revenue. She thinks he's just a workaholic, but several men suddenly approach her and offer her a reward if she takes care of Merlin, since their women are trapped by his charm. Alice goes to the inn, where she's surprised to see a large number of women, since it's just a small town. She sees Merlin and realizes he's the freeloader from her poster, so she decides to catch him. But she recalls that according to the reports, he always runs away, so she tries to get close to him first. She accidentally enters the stage, and he thinks she also wants to be a part of his performance. But they soon learn of each other's true identity, so she tries to kill him, but he dodges all of her attacks. She starts crying, telling him she's been living a miserable life after he left her, so the ladies think he's a terrible person for abandoning her. After that, Alice asks Merlin to return her treasure, but he reveals that he has already sold it. She mentions that he ruined her life, so she'll arrest him if he doesn't return the armor, but he reminds her she's no match for him. She realizes that she must live with her debt of 50 million gold, which surprises him because he only has a debt of a few thousand coins after freeloading for a year. She explains her situation to him, telling him she had to get a job in the Adventurers Guild and fight holy tier opponents to pay off her debt. But he gets excited, asking her how he can become an adventurer, so she tells him he'll need a referral. He asks her for her referral because he always wanted to become an adventurer, but she turns him down. Meanwhile, Henry walks around the city, but the guards tell him to go home because Martha will be upset. He mentions that he doesn't want to see the freeloader, and the adventurer who left to defeat the goblins appears. He asks the guards to open the gates, but they tell him they aren't allowed to open it at night. He notes that his friends are dead, and he's heavily wounded, so they open the gate. But it turns out to be a trap, and the goblins rush into the village. He asks Gia to free his fiancée as part of their agreement, but she explains that he has no right to negotiate with her because he's just a slave. Alice wonders why the Demon King wants to become an adventurer, and she's upset that she can no longer get her reward because no one can capture him. The goblins attack the inn, but Merlin realizes they aren't customers, so he kicks them out, which impresses the ladies. Martha worries for her son, so she rushes out to find him and leaves the tavern under his care. As more goblins appear, he quickly takes care of them and continues working as if nothing happened. He realizes that he won't get paid if anything happens to Martha, so he goes off to find her while she asks everyone if they've seen Henry. A man tells her he saw him near the gate and warns her that there are goblins everywhere, but she goes looking for him anyway. She calls out his name, which draws the monster's attention, and they take her away. Henry realizes she's in trouble, so he tries to help her, but he's so scared that he can't move. Meanwhile, Merlin walks around the village and thinks it's as chaotic as the Dark Realm. He runs into goblins and wants to avoid fighting them since they're so weak that they can't help him with his curse. But they still attack him, so he cuts them into pieces. Alice sees him and thinks he's working with the goblins, but he explains that he'll never team up with such low-ranked creatures. She notes that if he isn't with them, he should help her defeat them, but he explains that he doesn't care because he isn't a resident of the village. She reminds him that he wants to join the guild and tells him adventurers must protect the village, but he doesn't want to do it unless she pays him. She notes that she doesn't have money, so he tells her to step aside because he needs to find Martha. Alice thinks she can save the village alone, and she uses her ice magic to freeze the goblins. Gia observes her and thinks Alice won't be able to stop her if she lands a surprise attack, but Alice shocks her with a strong kick. She tells Gia to leave the village, but she mentions that despite being an elite tier, Alice can't defeat all of them. Gia orders the goblins to capture her, but a boy suddenly collapses before her and tells her about Merlin. She uses her magic to see how the goblins were killed and realizes that her army is no match for Merlin, so she orders them to retreat. The villagers look for their family, while a man named Johnson tries to advertise his services as a personal guard. They all ask him to save their loved ones, but he thinks they're already dead, so he tells them to focus on the future instead. Alice arrives with the adventurer who asks the guards to open the gates, and he tells them the goblins took their loved ones to their cave. One of the soldiers recognizes him and calls him a traitor, but Alice defends him, saying his fiancée and comrades were captured, so he was forced to work with the goblins. Johnson asks her who she is, so she introduces herself as the 233rd hero, and everyone starts talking about her. Johnson tries to turn them against her, so she kicks him away and decides to attack the cave alone. Henry decides to join her, thinking the villagers are all cowards, but he accidentally trips over a goblin and becomes scared as he sees the bodies. He goes to take his father's sword so that he can use it to save his mother. The unconscious goblins suddenly wake up, and he tries to attack them, but they easily defeat him. They're about to finish him off, but Merlin arrives to save him and tells them they're making him angry because they're the reason why he needs to work overtime. Henry tries to leave with the sword, and Merlin tells him to stay home, but he notes that he needs to save his mother. Merlin thinks he's always causing trouble, but he remembers the time he had to fight to save his sister and decides to help Henry. He notes that it will be the first time he lifts his sword for a human, but he doesn't know where the goblin's cave is. He hears a group of humans planning to rescue their loved ones in the goblin's lair, so he decides to join them. He volunteers to be their leader, telling them he's a strong warrior, but they think he isn't fit to lead them. Henry tries to tell them he's a capable fighter, but he doesn't want to explain himself, so he decides to appoint Johnson as their leader instead. They're glad that he'll lead the rescue because they think he's a reliable warrior, but he's too scared to face the goblins. Alice sneaks into the cave by distracting the goblins, while Gia tells the Goblin King about their raid. He praises her for capturing humans, but she tells him she encountered 2 strong fighters in the village. She claims that she could have defeated them, but she led them to the cave instead, so that he could enjoy watching them suffer. They finally arrive outside the goblin's cave, and Johnson starts shivering in fear, while Henry rushes to fight the goblins, but Merlin stops him because he knows it's a trap. Gia activates her fire barrier and tells them to surrender if they want to live. Merlin walks through it, which worries Henry, but he notes that the heat is nothing compared to the magma under his house. Gia notes that even holy tier warriors can't break through it, so the humans don't stand a chance, but Merlin suddenly appears behind her, telling her he walked right through it. She wonders who he is, but he can't reveal his true identity, so he tells her he's Daisy, and he manages to charm all the goblins. He grabs her hand and asks her to just hand over Martha, but she refuses and tries to burn him with her magic. But he easily stops her flames, so she realizes that he's been hiding his true powers. She uses her ultimate move to surround him with her flames, but he sneezes and sends all the goblins flying. She wonders if he's a monster, but he just flicks her, which sends her crashing into the mountain. The fire disappears, and Johnson can't believe Merlin was able to defeat Gia because she's an elite tier mage, and as he enters the cave, they notice that his silhouette is similar to that of the Nightblade. Meanwhile, Alice frees the prisoners, but she's spotted by goblins, so she tells Priest to lead everyone out of the cave while she handles them. She quickly defeats them, but accidentally enters the king's hall, where she sees him waiting for her. He reveals that Gia told him she'll deal with one of the attackers, and she'll send the other one to him, since he hasn't fought a strong opponent in ages. She realizes he's a holy tier fighter, and thinks he focuses on brute strength, but he surprises her with his speed, and shatters her ice shield. Merlin tries to find Martha, but he gets lost in the cave, because there are multiple paths. The Goblin King tries to grab Alice, but she jumps back and cuts his arm, which impresses him, because he knows that his previous hit broke her bones. He thinks she's just an ant compared to him, but she mentions that her master taught her that underestimating an opponent can be fatal. He manages to capture her, but she uses her giant ice sword to break free. She lands a combination attack, and thinks it's over, but he reveals that he was just pretending to be dead, since he likes to see his opponents fall into despair. He heals his wounds, and transforms his body before punching her away. Meanwhile, Priest and the others try to escape from the cave, but they soon find a figure in front of them, so they think they're surrounded by goblins. But it turns out to be Merlin, who's happy to see Martha, and he asks her to give him a bonus for working overtime. She grabs his arm and runs, because they don't have much time, but he stops and instantly takes out the goblins chasing after them. She asks him to save Alice, since she helped them escape, but he wonders if he should help her or leave her. Martha promises to triple his salary if he saves her, so he decides to do it. Priest tells him to be careful and advises him against entering a hall filled with gold coins, because the Goblin King is a holy tier opponent. He storms off, thinking he'll get rich after defeating a powerful enemy, but they think he's just worried about Alice. He knocks out several goblins on his way to the king's hall and blasts through the entrance, but he ignores the king and starts looking at all the gold. He cuts off the goblin's arm and grabs Alice, but he wonders if Martha will reduce his bonus, since Alice is injured. She asks him about the others, so he tells her they're safe, and that he'll get her out of there after he defeats the Goblin King. The Goblin King pretends to be hurt, and he suddenly regenerates his lost arm, but Merlin shows no reaction, so he wonders what's wrong with him. Merlin notes that he knows a troublemaker with a similar sense of humor, but she's much prettier than him. The Goblin King realizes he's strong, so he decides to go all out, and begins to attack him from all directions, but Merlin easily blocks all of his attacks. The Goblin King asks for his name, but Merlin thinks he doesn't deserve to know it, so he just tells him he's called Daisy. The Goblin King prepares to use his ultimate technique, so Merlin becomes excited. He offers to make Merlin his chancellor if he swears loyalty to him, but he laughs at his courage to make such an offer, telling him to go all out. So he uses his ultimate goblin's hammer skill, but Merlin easily blocks it, and Alice sees him from behind, realizing he's the Nightblade. He takes out his sword, and the Goblin King recognizes it as the legendary sword Vortex, which only the Demon King of Pride can draw. Merlin defeats him with a single blow, but he forgets to control his attack, so the entire cave starts collapsing. He wonders if he should save Alice or grab the treasure, and his conscience reminds him that she can refer him to the guild, so he ends up deciding to save her. He creates an opening to leave the cave, and everyone's glad they made it out alive. Henry considers him a hero and thanks him for saving everyone, but he starts crying over the lost treasure, while Martha thinks he's just worried about Alice. Merlin sees that Alice is badly injured, but he needs her to recommend him to the guild, so he decides to heal her. He takes off her clothes, but Martha enters and thinks they're about to get intimate, so she quickly rushes out with Henry, telling them to continue. He covers Alice with his saliva, since it has a healing effect on the opposite gender, and as she begins to heal, she starts dreaming, and he realizes it's because of the saliva, so he thinks he won't be able to enjoy a peaceful night. Alice wakes up the next morning, and everyone rushes to check on her. She doesn't remember what happened after she was defeated by the Goblin King, so Priest tells her she should thank Merlin, because he was the one who saved her. She thinks they should reconcile since they're old friends, but Alice tells her they're rivals. Everyone thanks Alice for saving them earlier, but she mentions that it's part of her job. Bella interviews Johnson, who brags about how he led the villagers to fight the goblins, but he becomes nervous when he sees Merlin. She asks him about the goblin invasion, but Merlin thinks it was just a few goblins, so she wonders if it was just a minor conflict exaggerated by the villagers. Martha tells him Alice is looking for him, and he thinks she wants to thank him, but when he goes to her room, she suddenly attacks him. She thinks he took advantage of her because he took off her clothes, and the priest next door heard weird sounds throughout the night,